The air inside the Budokan Arena in Tokyo shimmered with tension. Thousands of voices swelled and fell in waves, like the sea before a storm. Bright lights poured down onto the tatami mat, where two men stood facing each other, barefoot, motionless, and wrapped in white GIs that gleamed under the glare. One of them bowed, his movements graceful, disciplined, and deliberate. The other mirrored the gesture, a silent pact sealed between warriors. The referee raised his hand. Hajime! The crowd erupted as Marcus Reed stepped forward. Every fiber of his body moved with precision born from years of repetition. Thousands of throws, falls, drills, and endless hours on the mat. His breath came slow and even. His eyes locked on his opponent, a young South Korean fighter named Park Jin-ho, whose face still bore the raw confidence of youth. Marcus saw the impatience in him, the twitch in his front foot, the overeager stance, and knew that the first few seconds would decide everything. Park attacked first. A lightning-quick attempt at Uchimata. Marcus countered effortlessly, pivoting on his heel, redirecting the force, his hand finding the perfect grip. The mat whispered beneath their feet. For a heartbeat, they moved as one, a blur of muscle and will, and then Marcus swept his leg. Park stumbled, barely recovering. The crowd gasped. The rhythm continued. Strike for strike, grip for grip, the sound of fabric snapping with every motion. Sweat ran down Marcus's neck, his GIs sticking to his shoulders. But his focus never broke. He'd trained his whole life for this, not to dominate, not to destroy, but to achieve something purer. Control without cruelty, power guided by peace. That was the essence of judo. But fate, as always, has its own sense of irony. In the 6th minute, Park feinted left, then lunged right. Marcus saw the opening, too perfect to resist, and instinct took over. He gripped the sleeve, turned his hips, and executed the throw that had made him a legend. Sui Nage. It was flawless, textbook, beautiful, until it wasn't. A sickening crack tore through the air. A scream followed, high, human, terrified. Park's leg bent the wrong way as he hit the mat. The crowd's roar collapsed into stunned silence. Marcus froze, hands still extended from the throw, eyes wide in disbelief. For a moment, he couldn't process what he was seeing. The referee rushing in, the medical staff sprinting across the mat, Park's coach shouting in Korean, the way the young man's fingers clawed the air in pain. He'd thrown thousands of men in practice, in competition, in victory and defeat. None of it had ever ended like this. When Park was carried away on a stretcher, Marcus didn't move. The referee lifted his hand, signaling the end of the match, but he barely noticed. The gold medal ceremony felt like a blur, a dream collapsing into guilt. He stood on the podium, the anthem of his country swelling around him, the flag rising high, and all he could see was that broken leg, the twisted angle, the boy's face contorted in agony. He didn't raise his arm. He didn't smile. When the medal hung cold and heavy against his chest, he wanted to rip it off. It wasn't victory. It was a wound. That night, while the rest of the team celebrated, Marcus sat alone in his hotel room, the medal lying on the nightstand beside an untouched bottle of sake. The television replayed his match over and over, commentators calling the most decisive victory of the tournament, the crowd's cheers echoing like ghosts through the walls. He turned it off. Rain pattered against the window as he stared at his hands. They trembled slightly, and he clenched them tight until the shaking stopped. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger's, a man who'd spent a lifetime learning to control his body, but couldn't control the guilt blooming inside him. At dawn, he packed his duffel bag, left the medal behind, and vanished. He didn't say goodbye to his coach, his teammates, or the Federation. He boarded the first flight to Los Angeles under a different name, then caught a bus east with no destination. Somewhere in the middle of America, anonymity found him. He told himself he'd only rest for a while, take a break, regain balance, maybe find purpose again. But rest turned into retreat, and retreat turned into exile. The world moved on. Other athletes took his place. The sport celebrated new champions. The name Marcus Reed became a footnote, a mystery that sports journalists occasionally revisited. Whatever happened to the silent slam? The answer, if they looked closely enough, was heartbreakingly simple. He'd traded the roar of crowds for the hum of traffic lights, the echo of the tatami mat for the crunch of gravel under worn work boots, the applause for silence. Years passed like drifting snow. Marcus learned the art of invisibility, taking small jobs that required more patience than ambition. He swept factory floors. He unloaded boxes from trucks. He fixed fences for old farmers who never asked his last name. He lived in cheap motels and slept soundly for the first time in years. But even in sleep, he dreamed of that moment, the sound, the scream, the fracture. Sometimes he woke up clutching his chest, gasping as if he'd just hit the mat himself. There were days he tried to return to the gym. He even walked past a local dojo once, watching through the window as children in oversized GIs practiced rolls and falls. Their laughter filled the air, light and unburdened. But when the instructor noticed him and waved, Marcus turned away. He couldn't bear the thought of stepping back onto a mat, not when his last memory of it was pain, and so he kept walking. In Baltimore, he finally stopped. The city was noisy enough to drown out his thoughts, yet lonely enough to let him disappear. He found work through a temp agency, mostly night shifts, mostly quiet. The jobs suited him. People didn't ask questions at night. One evening, a hospital supervisor handed him a clipboard. Parking lot security. The man said, "Boring but steady. You'll be on your own most nights." "Sounds perfect," Marcus replied. That's how the former judo champion became the man who guarded cars. The hospital's parking lot stretched like a maze of concrete and faded lines. It wasn't glamorous work, checking locks, walking perimeters, chasing off the occasional loiterer, but it was peaceful. He liked the rhythm of it. The distant city lights, the murmur of ambulance sirens, the hum of vending machines. Every night, as his shift began, Marcus bowed slightly before starting his patrol, a private ritual, a remnant of a life that felt like someone else's dream. People noticed, of course. The nurses giggled about the weird guard who bows to the cars. The young orderlies called him Sensei Grandpa. Others thought he was slow, maybe even simple-minded. He didn't mind. Mockery was better than pity. He spoke little, worked hard, and kept his space clean. Every so often, he'd help someone jumpstart a car or carry heavy groceries to the bus stop. They thanked him politely and forgot his name the next day. That was fine, too. Still, there were moments, fleeting but sharp, when the old instinct flickered back to life. Once, when a man slipped on the icy lot, Marcus caught him before he hit the ground. His reflexes so fast the man never realized how close he'd come injury. Another time, when a stray dog ran into the path of an oncoming car, Marcus moved before thinking, pulling it away with a swiftness that startled even himself. He tried to ignore it, to bury it under routine. But muscle memory doesn't fade. It waits. On quiet nights, Marcus would stretch by the old oak tree at the far end of the lot. Slow movements, deliberate breathing, the ghost of judo living inside his body. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, it felt like the world bowed back. Sometimes he thought of the boy from Tokyo, Park Jinho, and wondered if he ever walked again. He'd tried once to find out, searching online, but all he found were old news clippings and a photo of Park in a wheelchair, smiling bravely beside a coach. Marcus closed the browser. The guilt felt heavier than ever, so he focused on his job. He counted cars, logged license plates, tightened the bolts on loose signs. He found comfort in small perfections, the same kind he'd once sought on the mat. And when people called him a fool, he simply smiled. They didn't know that behind that smile was a man who'd learned that real strength wasn't in winning fights, but in living with the fights you could never forget. The city's rhythm became his own, steady, repetitive, quiet. Yet somewhere deep inside, a part of him still waited, like a coiled spring. He didn't know it yet, but the night that would awaken it, the night that would make the world remember his name, was coming soon. It would begin with the sound of rain on metal, the faint click of a lock, and a choice that would remind him who he truly was. And so, as the last train passed in the distance and Marcus bowed once more before the silent rows of cars, he didn't realize that peace, like balance, is always temporary. Because destiny was about to test him again, not on a mat, but on the wet asphalt of a parking lot under the American sky. The first weeks on the job passed quietly, like the slow drift of leaves across water. Marcus found comfort in the repetition, in knowing what came next, in the predictable rhythm of movement and silence. Each shift began at 6 in the evening when the day staff left, their chatter and perfume fading into the air like the final echo of daylight. Then the hospital settled into its nocturnal hum. The low whine of fluorescent lights, the rhythmic hiss of automatic doors, the muted roll of stretchers over tile floors. Outside, the parking lot became Marcus's world, a square of asphalt bordered by oaks, lampposts, and shadows. At first glance, it was an unremarkable place. Rows of vehicles lined neatly between white stripes, a booth with fog windows, the faint smell of oil and wet cement. But to Marcus, it was something else entirely, a map of constant awareness. Every corner, every reflection, every sound had meaning. He walked the perimeter every hour, counting cars in his head, noting license plates without needing to write them down. He knew the security camera's blind spots better than the supervisor who'd installed them. He knew which cars belonged to doctors who worked the night shift, which to patients who might never come back to claim them. The younger guards thought he was strange. "You really count them?" one of them had asked, half amused, half incredulous. Marcus just smiled. "Counting keeps me focused," he said simply. He didn't explain that in judo, every fight was won by awareness. Not just of your opponent, but yourself, the floor beneath you, the air in the room. Losing awareness was how you got hurt. Out here, the principle was the same. Sometimes, during his rounds, he'd pause near the emergency entrance. Through the glass doors, he could see the nurses rushing between patients, doctors speaking in low voices, orderlies moving in and out like clockwork. He admired them. The same quiet discipline, the same steady endurance he'd once valued in training. He didn't know their names, and they didn't know his, but he respected the rhythm they all shared, doing what needed to be done, unseen and uncelebrated. The nights were long, and the city's heartbeat beyond the hospital walls was faint but ever-present. Sirens wailed, traffic hissed, distant laughter echoed from bars closing too late. On colder nights, fog rolled in from the harbor, turning the lot into a field of drifting ghosts. Marcus liked those nights best. The mist softened everything. The edges of buildings, the glare of lights, even the memories that crept up uninvited. He carried no weapon, only a flashlight and a battered notebook. The younger guards liked to joke about it. "What's that, your secret spy log?" they'd say. He'd just shrug. The truth was, he didn't write much in it. Only thoughts that came unbidden, fragments of a past he still couldn't name aloud. Balance is found in stillness. Regret is the way to control without compassion. Strength is knowing when not to strike. The words steadied him. Sometimes, he'd see reflections of his younger self in passing strangers. One evening, a teenage boy came by on a skateboard, cutting through the lot even though it wasn't allowed. Marcus watched him weave between cars, fluid and fearless. The boy grinned when he saw Marcus watching. "Hey, old man, don't bust me, all right?" he said with mock defiance. Marcus's lips curved slightly. "You should wear a helmet," he replied. The boy laughed, kicked off again, and vanished into the street. For a moment, Marcus's heart ached. That kind of carelessness, that freedom, was something he'd lost long ago. He stood there, the night pressing softly around him, wondering if the boy would ever understand how fragile bodies really are. By midnight, the hospital lights dimmed to half-strength, and Marcus took his break inside the booth. The heater was broken, so he brought a thermos of coffee and a small portable radio. It only caught 2 stations, one for late-night jazz, the other for baseball commentary. He preferred the jazz. It filled the silence like gentle rain, slow and mournful. He often watched the monitors as he sipped his coffee, tracing the movements on screen. A nurse crossing the lot, a janitor pushing a bin, a man sitting in his car too long, staring at the dashboard. Bad news, probably. He never intruded, but he noticed. He always noticed. Occasionally, paramedics came out for a smoke, tired and heavy-eyed. They called him Coach, after one of them saw him stretching one evening. "What are you, some kind of yoga master?" They joked. "Something like that," he said, smiling faintly. It became a running gag. "Hey, Coach, what's the best stretch for a bad back?" "Coach, think I can still do a split at 50? Marcus answered with the same patience he'd once used on young trainees. "Breathe deeper. Don't force the body. Let it remember its own limits." They laughed, but some actually listened. A few even started joining him for light stretches during their breaks. The habit spread. Soon, nurses passing by would nod politely. The cafeteria lady left him an extra sandwich some nights. Small gestures, nothing grand, but human enough to warm the cold edges of his solitude. Still, no one really knew him, and that was how he wanted it. The fewer people who looked closely, the easier it was to remain invisible. On nights when the wind cut through his jacket and loneliness pressed too close, Marcus thought of Baltimore's harbor lights, glittering far beyond the hospital roofs. He'd sometimes imagine he was back in Tokyo, just before match. The same electric stillness, the same waiting. But then he'd blink, and all that remained was a hum of a vending machine and the echo of tires over wet pavement. One night, around 2 a.m., he found himself standing beneath the oak tree again, stretching in the fog. The air smelled of rain and gasoline. He moved slowly, deliberately, shoulder rolls, hip turns, soft bends of knees. His body still remembered the patterns. Balance, flow, control. He could almost hear his old coach's voice in his head. Don't fight the movement. Feel it. But there was no coach now, no mat, no audience. Just him, an aging man in a security jacket, bowing to the quiet rhythm of the night. As he straightened, headlights flared across the lot. A car door slammed. A woman's voice, sharp, hurried, broke the calm. "Hey, wait," she called. Marcus turned. A nurse was running toward a man who'd gotten out of his car and was storming away. Their argument reached him in fragments. Something about betrayal, another man, the word divorce. He stayed where he was, invisible in the shadows. Then came the sound of glass breaking. Marcus moved instantly. The man had slammed his fist against the car window, blood streaking down his wrist. The nurse screamed. Before Marcus even thought, he was there, grabbing the man's forearm, guiding it away from the glass, his other hand steady on the man's shoulder. "You need to calm down," Marcus said quietly. The man tried to pull back, but Marcus's grip held, not violent, not even tight, but impossibly firm. The kind of control that came from knowing precisely where strength ended and damage began. Security arrived minutes later. They thanked Marcus, the nurse still trembling beside her car. The man was escorted away, muttering apologies. She turned to Marcus, eyes wide with shock and gratitude. You move so fast," she whispered. Marcus smiled faintly. "Reflex," he said, and went back to his post. That night, he didn't sleep. He kept replaying the scene in his mind. The flash of anger, the sound of glass, the way his body had moved on instinct. It scared him, how natural it had felt. The old rhythm, buried for years, rising to the surface again. He told himself it meant nothing, just an old habit. But deep down, he knew better. The body remembers what the heart denies. Over the following nights, he began to sense something shifting in the air. The city felt heavier, more restless. People were leaving their cars unlocked. Strangers lingered longer near the lot entrance. The sound of police sirens seemed closer each evening. One of the nurses told him there had been a string of car break-ins nearby, expensive vehicles stripped of electronics, thieves vanishing before cameras caught them. Marcus nodded, said he'd be careful, but he didn't need the warning. He'd already noticed the footprints, faint impressions in the dirt near the fence, the subtle change in the padlock's position. The signs were small, but clear to anyone who knew how to read a threat. Still, the supervisors didn't take it seriously. "Relax, Reed," one of them said, laughing. "This isn't a war zone. You're guarding cars, not gold." Marcus said nothing. He'd learned long ago that most people only believed danger after arrived. The following night, as the clock struck 3, he sat in his booth watching the rain form silver threads across the windshield of his truck. He didn't know why, but his pulse was steady, too steady, the kind that comes before something happens. When the sound came, a faint click from somewhere deep in the rows of parked cars, he knew The kind of knowing that doesn't come from logic, but from instinct. He rose slowly, reached for his flashlight, and stepped out into the rain. The night around him was a living thing, breathing, watching. He moved between the cars, every step measured. The beam of light cut through fog, glinting off chrome. Their movement. A figure crouched beside a sedan, prying at the lock with something metal. Marcus felt the world narrow to a single point. His heart didn't race. It steadied. Every lesson he'd ever learned about control, balance, and awareness came back in an instant. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice calm but commanding. The man turned, young, hooded, startled. The crowbar in his hand gleamed wet under the light. "Stay back, old man," he snapped. But Marcus didn't stop. His feet moved before thought, before fear, before time itself. In one flowing motion, he closed the distance, pivoted his body, and redirected the attacker's force. The crowbar fell. The man hit the ground, his arm twisted harmlessly but immovably behind his back. It was over in less than 3 seconds. Rain dripped from Marcus's hair as he knelt, breathing steadily, holding the thief down without effort. The nurses at the edge of the lot stood frozen, their cigarettes forgotten, eyes wide. When security arrived, Marcus simply said he was trying to steal the car. Then he stood up, brushed off his jacket, and walked back toward his booth. Behind him, the nurses whispered in awe. One of them said softly, "He's not what we thought." But Marcus didn't hear her. He was already lost in the quiet of his thoughts, wondering not how he'd done it, but why it felt so natural, so inevitable. The storm had passed, but something inside him had awakened. And as dawn broke over the hospital roofs, painting the sky in shades of pale gold, Marcus knew his life would never again return to the quiet rhythm he'd built so carefully. The rain had stopped by morning, but the world seemed to hum differently. Marcus sat inside the security booth, his jacket still damp from the night before, the faint smell of asphalt and ozone clinging to the air. He stirred his coffee absently, staring at the ripples forming across the surface. Outside, the hospital came alive with the rhythm of dawn. Nurses exchanging shifts, doctors walking briskly across the lot, janitors dragging bins that echoed against the pavement. Everything looked normal, but something had shifted. He could feel it in the way people looked at him now. When the first nurse walked by and gave him a timid wave, he thought nothing of it. But then another one stopped, holding her coffee like a peace offering. "Hey!" she said hesitantly. "You're the one who stopped that guy last night, right?" Marcus blinked, unsure how she even knew. "I just did my job," he replied quietly. "Yeah, well," she smiled awkwardly. "You didn't just do your job. You dropped that guy like Bruce Lee or something." She laughed nervously. "It's all over the hospital. Someone recorded part of it." "Recorded?" His voice tightened a little. "Yeah, on their phone. It's kind of gone viral." She showed him her screen. The shaky footage, caught from across the lot, showed him moving through the fog, a blur of precision and control. The thief's arm twisted, the crowbar falling, the man pinned to the ground. Then the camera cut off. The title read, "Old security guard takes down car thief in 3 seconds." He didn't know what to say. The nurse grinned. "You're famous now." Marcus looked away. "Fame," he murmured, "isn't always a blessing." By noon, people were talking. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation, and even the hospital's administration office called him in for a quick word. His supervisor, Mr. Dawson, was red-faced and sweating as he tried to sound both apologetic and impressed. "Reed, I gotta admit, I didn't know you had it in you," he said, half laughing. "The videos everywhere. You made the hospital look good. Heroic, even." Marcus stayed silent. He didn't like the word heroic. It reminded him too much of the headlines years ago, the ones that had praised him before they condemned him. Dawson, mistaking his silence for modesty, clapped him on the shoulder. "Corporate wants to meet you later this week. Don't worry, it's all good press." But it didn't feel like good press. Not to Marcus. Fame had a way of turning truth into spectacle. That afternoon, when he returned to his booth, a small crowd had gathered near the entrance. Nurses, orderlies, Even a few patients stood around holding out their phones, smiling and waving. "Hey, champ," someone called out. "You ever do boxing? Judo? Karate?" He paused mid-step. The word judo hit him like a ripple through still water. One of the nurses spoke up, teasingly. "Come on, tell us. Where do you learn moves like that?" Marcus forced a faint smile. "Just experience," he said simply. Then he slipped inside his booth and closed the door, the sound of laughter and chatter muffled by the glass. He sat there for a long time, hands clasped, staring at the reflection in the window. He hadn't heard that word, judo, spoken aloud in years, and now it lingered in his ears like an echo from another lifetime. For the first time in a long while, he found himself remembering. Not just a match in Tokyo, not the pain or the guilt, but the beginning. The smell of tatami mats, the click of bare feet, the bow before every fight, the discipline, the quiet joy of perfect form. It had been beautiful once, before it became tragedy. That night, when his shift began again, the parking lot no longer felt the same. He sensed eyes on him, admiring, curious, suspicious. Even the young guards who used to mock him now treated him differently, their jokes suddenly replaced with awe. "Man, you should have told us you were a black belt," one of them said, eyes wide. "You could have taught us something." "I was never much of a teacher," Marcus replied softly. But later, alone in the quiet hour between midnight and dawn, he realized that wasn't true. He had been a teacher once. He'd trained younger athletes, shared every secret he knew about balance, breathing, control. He believed in the beauty of teaching others how to respect power rather than abuse it. That memory, too, felt like another life. Over the next few days, the story continued to grow. News channels picked it up. Local reporters called, asking for interviews. He declined them all. The hospital PR team tried to convince him otherwise. "Just say a few words, Mr. Reed. You'd be an inspiration to others." But he refused. He didn't want to be anyone's inspiration. He didn't want to stand in front of cameras again. The last time he had, it had ruined him. Still, the attention wouldn't fade. On the third night after the incident, a stranger approached him in the lot. A man in a trench coat, camera hanging from his neck. "Mr. Reed," he said politely, "my name's Lucas Meyer. I'm a reporter with the Baltimore Herald. I've been trying to reach you for days." Marcus didn't answer. He just kept walking. "I know who you are," the man continued, following him. "Marcus Reed. U.S. National Judo Champion, 2004 through 2008. They used to call you the Silent Slam." Marcus stopped. His breath caught in his throat. "You disappeared after Tokyo," Lucas went on, his tone soft but unyielding. "Everyone thought you'd gone overseas, maybe retired. No one imagined you'd end up here, working security." Marcus turned slowly. His expression was calm, but his voice carried quiet steel. "You need to stop digging into things that don't concern you." Lucas hesitated. "It does concern me. People want to know the truth. You were one of the greatest martial artists in American history, and then you just vanished. Don't you think people deserve to know what happened?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "They don't." The reporter's eyes softened. "I watched your old matches," he said quietly. "You weren't just a fighter. You were graceful, controlled. You made judo look like art. What happened that made you walk away from all of it?" Marcus didn't answer. He walked away, the sound of rain beginning to tap gently against the hood of his jacket. But that night, as he stood beneath the oak tree again, stretching the mist, he found himself whispering the question out loud. What had happened? He knew the answer, of course. He'd lived with it every day since Tokyo. The guilt, the silence, the self-imposed exile. But hearing it spoken aloud by someone else, someone who saw him, and not just a job, unraveled something deep inside him. Later, when he returned to booth, the glow of the monitors cast soft light on his face. He opened the small drawer beneath the desk and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping he'd kept hidden for years. The photo was grainy, faded from time, him standing on the podium, eyes cast downward, gold medal around his neck. The headline read, "American Judo Champion Claims Victory, Opponent Hospitalized." He stared at it for a long while before folding it back up and tucking it away. The following evening, the reporter returned, but this time he didn't bring a camera. He just stood quietly near the booth until Marcus came out. "I'm not here to dig," he said. "I just wanted to say, the man you fought in Tokyo, Park Jin-ho, he recovered. He still teaches judo. I met him years ago in Seoul." Marcus froze. "He teaches?" "Yes. He uses a cane, but he's still active. He said you were the best opponent he ever faced, that you bowed before the match and after. He never blamed you, said accidents happen, that it was honor, not violence." For the first time in years, Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that caused so much pain, and exhaled slowly. Lucas smiled faintly. "He told me one more thing," he added. He said, "If you ever meet Marcus Reed, tell him I forgave him long before he forgave himself." The word struck like sunlight after storm. Marcus didn't speak, but a tear slid down his cheek. He hadn't cried since that night in Tokyo. Lucas nodded respectfully. Sensing enough had been said. "I won't publish your story," he said. "Some truths belong to the people who live them." Marcus simply nodded in gratitude. For the rest of the week, the hospital continued to buzz, but inside him, something had changed. He felt lighter. The world seemed sharper, clearer. For the first time in years, he walked without the invisible weight pressing on his shoulders. He resumed his nightly rounds with quiet focus, but this time, every step felt different. The asphalt beneath his boots, the hum of lights, even the stillness of the cars. It all seemed to hum with a kind of peace he hadn't known in years. One night, as he stood watching the skyline burn orange against the dark, he whispered softly into the wind, "Thank you, Jin-ho." He didn't need to explain to whom he was speaking. The night understood. But fate, as always, never lets peace linger too long. Because in the days that followed, something darker began to stir again, an unease that swept through the city like a low current. Another break-in, this time violent. A guard from another hospital injured. The police warned them to stay alert. And as Marcus prepared for another long shift, he couldn't shake the feeling that the night would soon test him once more. Not with guilt this time, but with choice. Baltimore's late autumn sky wore a hard, pewter color, the kind that pressed low over buildings and made the world feel a little closer, a little heavier. The air was raw with the smell of rain and exhaust, and the hospital's halogen lamps hummed like tired bees. Marcus arrived early for his shift, the weight of a police bulletin folded in his pocket. 2 nights ago, a guard 3 neighborhoods over had been knocked unconscious in a brazen surgical hit. 3 men in dark hoodies, 1 lookout, 2 lifters, in and out in under 4 minutes. Airbags, catalytic converters, steering columns, gone. The guard had woken with blood in his hair and a split memory. One voice had said no faces. Another had said no heroes. The PR people had wanted Marcus to smile for the camera and speak about vigilance. He had said no. He ironed his uniform instead, an old habit and old grace, and came to work with the same quiet he always carried. But inside him, something had shifted since the reporter's visit, since the words from Park Jin-ho that had crossed an ocean and a decade to find him. Forgiveness had slipped a key into an old lock. The door inside him creaked and the room beyond smelled like wind and tatami. Discipline, not fear. Mercy, not guilt. He signed in, took the radio, tested the flashlight, and stepped into the early dark. The lot was a mirror of the city's geometry. Lines, corners, glinting surfaces. He knew its temperament the way a farmer knows his soil. Tonight, it was unsettled. The wind came in short grunts between the buildings. Paper scudded across the asphalt and clapped itself to the chain-link fence. The old oak at the far edge had let go most of its leaves, and the few that remained trembled like coins on a string. The new kid on the mid-shift, Arturo, stood by the entrance booth practicing spins with his key ring. He was 19, all elbows and new tattoos, a gentle bravado that didn't know heartbreak yet. "Coach," he said, grinning, the nickname sticking because everyone liked how it warmed the space around the old guard. "You hear about Mercy General? They got hit at 3 a.m., cleaned out 2 SUVs like it was nothing. I heard, Marcus said. He scanned the long rows. Keep your eyes open. Don't play a hero. Call first. Arturo mimed a two-finger salute. Yes, sir. Then quieter. You think they'll come here? If I were them, Marcus said, I'd make a circle and test the softest point. People get tired after they think they've been careful long enough. Arturo sobered. I'll stay sharp. By 8, the lot was full of doctor sedans, nurse compacts, and visitors' minivans that still held the day's warmth. By 10, the first rain needled down, stippling every hood with a constellation of silver. The security cameras threw their cold gaze from corners, and Marcus made his rounds. Heel toe, breath even, shoulders loose, hands soft on the flashlight. His senses engaged the way you slip into a stance. Peripheral vision drinking the long shadows, ears sorting ambient noise from anomaly, instinct humming on a low frequency. He passed the oak, rolled his shoulders, felt the familiar play of balance between arches and hips. The knight pressed the stethoscope to the lot's chest. He listened for the skip in a heartbeat. It came, just after midnight, as a pattern rather than a sound. 2 cars that never parked together were parked together now. A truck that always face out was facing in. A camera that obeyed its sweep had hiccuped and stuck for a quarter turn, the way a careful hand might nudge a metronome off time to hide a pause. Small differences. But judo had taught him to read what people didn't know they were writing with their bodies, and thieves wrote poems in negative space. He went back to the booth and took the radio off the hook. No need for chatter. He keyed the mic once. A soft click. Arturo's ear on the other, and would learn its meanings the way a young uke learns to feel air shift before the throw. He let the radio hang and stepped out again, crossing into the high rows as the wind carried a faint whiff of cut rubber. A tire sidewall had been parted somewhere, then resealed with spit and patience. Not tonight. Earlier. A rehearsal. He slowed, letting the rhythm of his gait lengthen, soften. Predators listened for confidence and for fear. He offered neither, just the uncomplicated music of a man who belonged where he walked. He came up the center aisle and took in the cars like faces, this one frowning, this one asleep, this one eyes open under lowered lids. He saw it then. A gloved hand cupping a phone screen to smother its glow, the curl of a hood where a head should be still, a shadow that swallowed light instead of returning it. 3 of them, one near a black Tahoe, working the column, one crouched by the wheel well of a late-model sedan, sawzall tucked under a trash bag to smother its bite. One out at the lip of the lot, not moving, not nervy, the lookout with a winter's patience. Their formation was tight. Nerves had practiced into muscle. The closest one raised his eyes to the mirror and saw only a lean shape in a hospital jacket, a flashlight averted, so as not to blind. He returned to the column. Marcus stopped 2 cars away, not hiding, not advancing. Evening, he said, voice conversational, almost friendly. Hospital lots close the service after midnight. You fellas need a jump or a tow. I can call it in. The crouching man didn't look up. The Tahoe man barely twitched. The lookout's head tilted 1 degree, listening for a pattern he'd heard in 50 encounters. Warning, escalation, authority bark. He heard none of it. He straightened, hand in his pocket. Likely a phone, maybe a blade, possibly nothing. We're good, he said. The accent was local, vowels flat with years of row house stoops. Go to your rounds, old-timer. Marcus kept the air easy. Rounds bring me here. You know what happens next. Yeah, said the one at the Tahoe, annoyance creeping in. Next you go call your buddy, so you both can feel big. Then we all waste 15 minutes pretending no one knows what's happening. You don't get paid enough. Man. Walk away. The sawzall shifted under the bag, its battery pack glinting. The lookout slid 1 step, cutting the angle on distance to the exit. A neat triangle. Marcus tasted the geometry on his tongue like salt. He could walk away and call it in, wait for sirens, hope the men vanished before uniforms arrived. He could bark and bluff. He could swing the flashlight like a club and be a man he had promised never to be. Or he could do the thing judo had carved into his bones, enter the line of attack and become, for a breath, part of their motion, then return them to a world with less harm than they had planned. He exhaled, and in that breath Tokyo's old air and Baltimore's new rain shook hands. Let me tell you what happens next, he said gently. You put the tools down. You take 3 steps backward. You go home with all your teeth, and all your choices still yours. The hospital updates its locks and learns something. No one here loses what's left of their life. The Tahoe man snorted. And if we don't, then I do my job, Marcus said. All of it. Time did that strange thing it does when men pretend it is theirs. A span as thin as silk stretched across the space between what might happen and what would. The lookout gave a tiny nod. We stay. The Sawzall man adjusted his bag. We proceed. The Tahoe man straightened and showed his empty hands first, a courtesy, then confidence, then heat. The flash of a small pistol tugged halfway out of his waistband for punctuation, not purpose. A scarecrow. A lie that sometimes worked. Don't, Marcus said softly. Not a threat. Advice, like you'd give a friend near a cliff. The pistol rose another inch. The Sawzall bag made its first hungry purr. The lookout set his feet and killed the space to the exit by half. Marcus entered. 2 strides took him to the pistol, and his left hand met the man's right wrist like a cup meets water. A half turn. Kotek Geisha without cruelty, and the gun's angle kissed the asphalt while its owner's balance flew ahead of him and forgot to tell his feet. The pistol slid under the Tahoe. Marcus never looked at it. His right forearm rode the man's triceps down with the gentlest pressure a door needs to close. The man met the ground on the soft part of his ego instead of the hard part of his skull. The weapon stayed a dumb thing. The lookout moved on that beat. Fast, good. He'd wrestled in school, kept the hips honest. He came low, arm snaking for a waist cinch. Marcus gave him his waist, and then wasn't there. A pivot, tie sabaki like stepping out of rain, and the lookout's momentum rode itself into a circle. Osoto Gari with mercy. A reap that didn't split, a fall that taught. The man's breath left him in a soft oof, surprise beating anger to the door of his face. The Sawzall man had a blade now, box cutter, fresh keen. He came not reckless, but committed, the way men do when the world has taught them that the only prayers that get answered are the ones you mail yourself. He slashed for the jacket to mark space. Marcus sank, narrowed, and the cut found only air that used to be a shoulder. Hand on knuckles. Twist on timing. Nikio's cousin without the sharpness, and the blade visited the ground the way a tired hand visits a table. Marcus's knee found a place behind the man's elbow that made violence remember it had a mother. The box cutter was suddenly a toy 2 feet away. Enough, Marcus said. It traveled on a calm the night recognized. 3 men stared up at him from 3 different places, each with a map they hadn't meant to draw. The Tahoe man turned his head, eyes cutting toward the undercarriage where the pistol had browsed and gone grazing. The lookout wheezed, then laughed once, short and incredulous. The Sawzall man swallowed something that tasted like the past. Sirens did not yet wail. Rain stitched up the air. Somewhere near the entrance, a phone camera shivered and recorded. Arturo, wide-eyed, forgetting protocol, remembering only awe. Listen, Marcus said, voice low, not for the camera, not for anyone but the 3 breaths in front of him. I don't want to break you. I've done enough breaking to last a life. The words found him as easily as he found wrists. You came here to take, and I came here to stop. That's already happened. Now we decide what kind of men we're going to be in the 30 seconds before someone else decides for us. The lookout's face twitched with the arithmetic. The Tahoe man's pride held the pencil and snapped it. The Sawzall man looked at his hands like they might answer. Get up slow, Marcus said. Empty. Walk to the fence. Leave the tools. Leave the night the way you found it. It might have gone that way. In another city. In a kinder year. In a story where lessons arrive on time. But the Tahoe man's pride wanted witness, and pride is deaf to good counsel. He rolled to a knee, found a pistol with desperation's radar, and came up with it hot in his palm and colder in his eyes. The aim was wrong. Fear will always teach bad geometry, but wrong bullets still find right graves. Marcus did not see his life. He saw the pistol's front sight jiggle on a string of nerves and saw, behind it, the soft glow of the yard's doors and the translucent reflection of a young nurse pushing a bed, and in that glass there was the outline of a boy with a skateboard who didn't know fragility yet, and a dog with a ridiculous grin, and Arturo the key ring and a mother's voiceless phone. He stepped. Irene, not an attack, and entering. His left hand lifted the pistol's muzzle, not like a slap, but like correcting a child's chin before a photograph. The gun bucked from panic rather than purpose, and the bullet went into the gray belly of the night, where it could chew nothing but rain. His right palm found a man's sternum, and taught it a quiet lesson about weight. The man folded into the truth that the ground is where we all end up. The gun skittered into a storm drain, and the night drank its tantrum. Silent arrived on the heels of violence the way a tide follows a thrown stone. Inevitable, larger than the thrower imagined. Arturo's phone lowered an inch. Somewhere inside the hospital someone said, "Did you hear that?" And someone else lied to them kindly. Marcus stood with his breath steady and his hands open, as if to show the sky he had not stolen anything from it. He looked down at the three men. Boys, really, with old men's debt stapled to their backs. He felt the old ache, not of muscle but of spirit, and he let be not an accusation but a prayer. "I'm going to call this in," he said. "You're going to sit still. When the police come, you're going to tell them this was the worst idea you had on the worst night you chose. You're going to take the second chance that always hides inside the first bad choice." The lookout nodded without realizing it. The Sawzall man closed his eyes as if he could rest on the word chance. The Tahoe man stared at the storm drain like the ocean owed him a return. Blue halos arrived in the distance, then grew, then painted everything with a false dawn. Commands flew. Hands showed themselves. Knees found asphalt. Arturo talked too fast. Marcus stood a little to the side and let the uniforms do the thing uniforms were made to do. When a sergeant with 20 years of tired in his eyes asked, "You the one who had them on the ground?" Marcus said, "They put themselves there. I helped with the finding." Statements. Bags. Zip ties. A nod from a paramedic who'd stretched with Coach. Enough times to know that even calm men have storms inside them. Another nod from a detective who had the sense to ask, quietly, "You military?" and the sense to accept just "old" as an answer. By 3 a.m., the lot was itself again, wet, humming, slightly ashamed of the drama it had hosted. Arturo hovered with 1,000 questions stapled behind his teeth. "How did you—" "What was that?" "The gun?" He shook his head and grinned like an astonished child. "Coach, you're—" He tried on a handful of words, none of them fitting. He settled on, "You okay?" Marcus checked in with the parts of himself that mattered. Breath, balance. The soft animal that crouches inside the ribs and trembles when it thinks the sky is tilted. It was quiet now. "I'm okay," he said. Arturo's grin softened. "You always say that like you're telling me I'm okay." "Maybe I am," Marcus said. He looked past the kid to where the hospital's glass held a watery version of the lot, and in it his own figure looked leaner than the one in his memory. Forgiveness had subtracted something. So had necessity. He thought of Park Jin-ho's cane, and the clean line of a bow. He bowed his head, barely, toward no one anyone else could see. Dawn didn't so much break as peel back, a slow lift of greater light. The world yawned. Cleaners took out trash. A baker's truck rumbled by and perfumed the air with bread. In that tender hour when the night's sins are counted and the day's mercies are assigned, the hospital director, who had slept through most of his own life, arrived early for once with a tie he thought would look decisive on television. He shook Marcus's hand for the camera a PR assistant carried, like communion plate. "On behalf of," he began. "Don't," Marcus said, gentle, not unkind. "Let the statement be about the police and the hospital's safety measures. Let the part about men making better choices come later, when nobody's filming." The director blinked. The PR assistant, young enough to know what decency felt like even if she didn't have the words yet, lowered the camera a few inches and said nothing. By 7, sunlight had threaded itself through the low clouds and turned every raindrop on every hood into a miniature confession. Nurses came out and fussed over Arturo, because he was 19 and their hearts had ached for 19-year-olds since time began. A few came to Marcus with styrofoam cups in gratitude, so earnest it made the air warm. He accepted the coffee and the thanks, and changed the subject each time to how strong the morning smelled. News would bleed and spin and repeat. That was its nature. But the reckoning he had expected had not been with fame. It had been with himself. He had entered violence again and not become it. He had touched harm and left it quieter than he found it. He had not used strength to punish. He had used it to return the night to itself. And in doing so, he had returned something in himself to alignment. The guilt that had driven him into exile had met, at last, a truth that could hold it. If power is guided by compassion, it can be trusted to act. He felt the old bow in his spine, not toward victory, not toward an opponent, but toward a vow. His shift ended, but he did not clock out. He walked once more to the oak tree and stood beneath its torn canopy. He lifted his arms and felt the rain's aftertaste on his skin. He moved through a kata no one had taught him. One for aging men, one for night watchmen, one for people who have learned to be gentle in a world that celebrates shouts. The wind nodded its approval. Footsteps approached and then paused, respectful at the edge of his invisible mat. "Mr. Reed?" The voice was careful, practiced at not startling people. Marcus turned. A woman in a gray suit stood there, her badge tilted so he could read it if he wanted. Under it, a name, ADA Lauren Mendez. "I'm with the state's attorney's office. I was at Mercy General earlier this week. Your encounter with our trio last night ties to a larger pattern. We're building a case." Marcus listened. The wind tugged at his jacket. "We'll need your statement. Formally. There's also something else." She hesitated, the way professionals do when a second agenda rides shotgun with a first. "We're thinking of organizing a training for hospital security across the district. Non-lethal response, de-escalation, situational awareness. What you did last night," she tipped her head, not a bow, but a cousin. "We like others to learn it before they learn it in a crisis." "I'm not a teacher," he said automatically. Then he heard the lie knock on his own door. He had taught all his life, bodies, breaths, boys who didn't yet know kindness from victory. "You don't have to answer now," Mendez said, "but think about it." She looked at the lot, as if it were a person whose hand she wanted to shake. "This place is safer, because you're here. We'd like to borrow that." She left a card he wouldn't call, and walked back toward a day that wanted things from her. Marcus looked at the card until it blurred, then pocketed it like a stone someone had asked him to carry for a while. He finally signed out at 9, later than he was paid for, earlier than the day wanted. As he walked toward the bus stop, a battered Civic pulled up beside him, rolling the window down, as if it had always meant to be his companion. Lucas Meyer leaned across in the driver's seat, camera nowhere in sight. "You going this way?" he asked. "Which way is this way?" Marcus said, at the old joke men use to decide whether to trust conversation. "Toward whatever comes next," Lucas said. He had new lines around his eyes, and the open look of someone who had seen a thing that made him want to be better. "I'll walk," Marcus said, "but you can walk with me." They went in step, two men whose biographies would never fit on a lower third cheering. Lucas didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. Sometimes you put your hands on a story and feel that it doesn't belong to you. Instead, he said, "You know what I like about the city?" "What's that?" "It always smells like it rained yesterday and might rain again tomorrow, like it knows how to start over." Marcus smiled, small and true. "That's a good smell." They parted at the corner where the bus sighed and opened its wide mouth to young men inside. Marcus climbed in and found his seat and let the city slide past. Barbershops waking with cautious optimism, a woman watering a plant on a windowsill with the seriousness of a surgeon, a kid carrying a trumpet case like a promise. He closed his eyes and let the rhythm of the engine tick into the places where adrenaline had left chalk marks. Home was a room over a laundromat that smelled like heat and perseverance. He boiled water. He placed a tea bag in a chip mug and let the steam write little fogs on the window. He took the card from his pocket and set it on the table, next to the folded clipping of his younger self, refusing a smile he had not yet earned. He did not open the clipping. He did not turn the card over. He just sat with both truths like two hands resting on his knees. The boy who vanished and the man who had chosen not to. That night, he dreamed of the Budokan. Not the crack or the scream or the medal's indifferent weight, but the bow. Two men acknowledging a world larger than their contest, a set of values older than applause. He woke at dawn to the sound of rain returning to the city like a forgiven cousin. He breathed in breathed out, and felt that the ground under his feet had chosen him back. When he returned to the lot that evening, the oak looked less lonely. Arturo had a bruise he wore like a graduate sash and a question about joint locks that he delivered with the reverence of a student. The nurses passed and nodded with a kinship that didn't require an origin story. The air held fewer knives. The cameras swung in their proper arcs. And the night that came didn't feel like an ambush. It felt like an agreement. As he began his rounds, he paused at the boundary where asphalt gives up and grass insists. He bowed, not to cars or cameras, but to the work, to the vow, to the quiet creed that had survived every test. Use strength to return balance, not advertise it. Enter conflict to end it, not to be seen inside it. Protect without punishing. Leave the night gentler than you found it. He rose and walked, his steps light, his attention whole. Somewhere down the line there would be speeches and invitations, and the complicated kindness of a world that finally wanted to know him. Somewhere down the line there would be a dojo that did not yet exist, and a blue mat that smelled like new beginnings, and boys who would learn to bow because an old man taught them that bowing was what men did when they respected their own power. But tonight there was only the lot and the rain, and the very next breath, and that was enough to make a life. The rain had been steady all day, that soft kind of drizzle that hung in the air more than it fell, blurring the outlines of buildings and turning the streets into a mirror of light. When Marcus arrived for his evening shift, the air smelled faintly of iron and wet leaves, the city humming its usual tired tune. But he was no longer the same silent shadow who once drifted through the lot unnoticed. People greeted him now. Nurses smiled when they passed. Drivers rolled down windows to say thank you. Even the paramedics nodded like soldiers passing another veteran of an unspoken war. He didn't seek their recognition. It wasn't what he worked for, but it followed him anyway. Respect had replaced ridicule, and with it came a strange kind of attention he'd never wanted but now had to face. The hospital board had decided to name him Employee of the Quarter, a title that made him wince every time someone said out loud. They'd taken his picture for the newsletter. He'd tried to look neutral, but ended up looking sad, and they printed a short article calling him the embodiment of quiet heroism. He kept the newsletter folded under the counter in his booth, unread except for the first line. The quiet was still his refuge, but it was becoming harder to protect. 2 nights after the incident with the thieves, a black SUV pulled into the lot and parked near his booth. The door opened, and Assistant District Attorney Lauren Mendez stepped out, umbrella in one hand, folder in the other. She moved like someone used to getting things done, but when she reached him, her expression softened. "Mr. Reed," she greeted, her tone warm but professional. "Do you have a few minutes?" Marcus set down his coffee. "I suppose I do. You're the one who came by last week." "That's right." She smiled. "I wanted to follow up off the record, if that helps." He nodded for her to continue. "I've been thinking about what happened here," she said, glancing toward the far end of the lot, where the blue police tape had fluttered and vanished days ago. "What you did wasn't just luck or instinct. It was training. Real, disciplined training. You de-escalated 3 armed suspects without a single fatal injury. That's rare. That's almost unheard of." Marcus didn't answer. Praise still felt foreign, uncomfortable. Mendez leaned against the booth. "We're starting a pilot program for hospital security across the district. Non-lethal response, situational awareness, conflict management. The goal is to prepare guards for the kind of moments most people freeze in. The kind you handled." He shook his head. "I'm no instructor anymore." "That's not what I saw," she replied softly. "And it's not what your colleagues see either. They call you coach, right? Seems like teaching never really left you." Marcus looked out across the parking lot. The lights flickered against the wet ground, stretching his shadow far into the distance. "There's a difference between knowing something and knowing how to pass it on." Mendez smiled faintly. "That may be true, but from what I've heard, you've been doing both." She opened the folder and slid a sheet of paper toward him. "This is a formal offer, but it doesn't have to be official yet. You'd be consulting, training hospital staff, maybe even police cadets, helping them learn how to control confrontation before it turns violent. Marcus didn't reach for the paper. You make it sound easy. It's not, she admitted, but it's necessary. And frankly, people would listen to you more than they would anyone in a suit. Rain tapped gently on the metal roof of the booth. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Marcus sighed. I left teaching behind for a reason. I know, she said quietly. I read your file. The accident in Tokyo, the retirement, the silence afterward. You walked away because you thought you hurt someone beyond repair. He stiffened. That's enough. Her voice softened further. He's walking again, Mr. Reed. The man from Tokyo. He teaches judo to kids now. Marcus's breath caught. You spoke to him? No, but I read about him. He said something once, in an interview a few years back. He said, my injury didn't end my journey. It taught me what judo really means. Balance through forgiveness. The words landed heavy, like pebbles dropped into a still pond. Marcus stared at the floor. He forgave me, he murmured, but I never forgave myself. Maybe teaching again is how you start. She let that hang between them, then gathered her folder. Think about it, she said, stepping back into the rain. You've already changed lives without trying. Imagine what happens if you actually do. When she left, Marcus stood there long after the SUV's taillights disappeared into the wet night. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened to the rain whisper against the asphalt. That night he couldn't sleep. The sound of the city felt louder, more insistent. He walked his apartment in slow circles, old memories stirring like ghosts in a half-lit room. He thought of the dojo in Denver where he'd first started, the laughter of kids trying to perfect their falls. He remembered the way his old coach used to clap his shoulder after every match and say, the real fight is with yourself, Reed. The mat just shows you who's winning. He'd stopped fighting himself the day he left the mat. Or maybe he'd just surrendered. By sunrise, he'd made up his mind. He'd called the number on the card. Mendez answered on the second ring. I had a feeling you'd call, she said. I'll help, Marcus said. But I'm not doing this for recognition or titles. I didn't think you were, she said. Can we meet tomorrow? The police academy downtown. He hesitated. Tomorrow's fine. When the call ended, Marcus sat in silence, his hands folded in front of him. For the first time in years, he felt something like anticipation, an energy that was both foreign and familiar. The world was opening a door he thought he'd sealed shut forever. That next afternoon, he took the bus into the heart of Baltimore. The academy was a squat brick building that smelled of sweat, rubber, and determination. Mendez met him at the entrance, clipboard in hand. Inside, a dozen recruits stood in a circle, chatting, their uniforms crisp and expressions cocky. When they saw Marcus' gray hair, weathered face, modest jacket, they went quiet. This, Mendez announced, is Mr. Reed. He's here to teach you something that might save your life one day. A few skeptical glances darted around. One recruit whispered, this guy? Under his breath. Marcus smiled faintly. It's all right, he said. You can doubt me. Doubt is healthy. But listen carefully. The day you meet fear, you'll realize it doesn't care how big you are or what badge you wear. It only cares if you know how to move. He stepped into the circle and motioned to one of them. Come at me. The recruit laughed. Seriously? Seriously. It was quick, almost too quick for the eye to follow. One step, a turn, a shift of balance, and the recruit found himself lying flat on his back, the air whooshing from his lungs. Marcus helped him up gently. That wasn't power, he said. That was control. You can end a fight without throwing a punch. You just need to understand balance, yours and theirs. The room fell silent. Over the next hour, Marcus moved among them like a conductor guiding an orchestra. He corrected stances, adjusted grips, and spoke softly about awareness. How to read tension, how to sense intention, how to stop violence before it started. Even the skeptical ones began to lean in, listening, learning. By the end, sweat glistened on their brows. But something else lingered too, a kind of humility that training often strips away. When the session ended, Mendez approached him. You have a gift, she said simply. You make people want to be better. Marcus looked around the room, the young faces, the open notebooks, the faint echo of laughter, and something deep inside him shifted again. For the first time in years, he felt at peace with who he'd become. He wasn't hiding anymore. That night, he walked home through streets lit with golden lamplight, the city breathing around him like a living thing. The air was cool, clean, the future uncertain but alive. He passed a storefront window and caught his reflection, older, lined, but lighter somehow. He thought of park, of forgiveness, of balance. When he reached the oak tree at the hospital, he bowed once, the same quiet motion that had followed him through every chapter of his life. Only this time, it wasn't habit. It was gratitude. The next morning, the hospital director called to ask if he'd be interested in leading a weekly self-defense course for the staff. The nurses had asked for it. Marcus smiled into the phone. "Tell them I'll see them on Saturday." And just like that, the man once mocked as the slow guard had become something else entirely, the quiet teacher who turned peace into a lesson worth learning. But the world, as it always does, wasn't done testing him, because peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the strength to stand in its center. And soon, a new challenge arrived, one that wouldn't come from thieves or cameras or fame, but from within the very walls he'd sworn to protect. The winter sun rose late over Baltimore, spilling a tired amber light over the city, like warm tea over a cold table. The hospital's windows glowed faintly against a gray sky, and the oak tree in the parking lot stood bare and quiet, its branches etched like veins against the pale morning. Marcus arrived early, as he always did, the crunch of frost beneath his boots breaking the silence. The city had changed around him, though the streets still hummed with sirens and stories. It was he who had softened. 2 months had passed since he'd first stepped into the academy to teach again, and the quiet rhythm of his life had taken on a different texture. The parking lot still belonged to him, the rows of cars, the shifting light, the quiet hum of the night, but so did something else now, a circle of people who carried a little of his calm, his discipline, his philosophy. The nurses who once hurried past him now paused to ask about balance and breathing. The guards who once joked behind his back now practiced wrist locks between shifts. Even the doctors, drawn by curiosity or exhaustion, sometimes lingered to watch. Every Saturday morning, he rolled out old mats in the hospital gym and held an hour-long session. He never called it self-defense. He called it finding your balance. To the staff, it became more than a class. It was therapy in motion. They came tired, overwhelmed, sometimes broken, and left with a little more stillness than they'd arrived with. Marcus never preached, never lectured. He simply showed them how to move, how to breathe, how to meet chaos without fighting it. It was on one of those mornings that he first noticed a nurse named Clara, a small woman with quiet eyes and a careful gait, who stood at the back of the room watching before she joined. When he asked her to step forward, she smiled nervously and said, "I'm not here to fight anyone, Mr. Reed. I just want to stop shaking when people shout." Marcus nodded. "Then you're already here for the right reason." He showed her how to root her stance, how to breathe through her spine, how to raise her hands not as weapons, but as boundaries. Slowly, her movements grew steadier, her eyes brighter. When she left that first day, she bowed deeply, a gesture she'd never been taught but somehow understood. From then on, she never missed a session. Word spread quietly. A paramedic brought his teenage son. A janitor who'd seen too much of life asked if his wife could join. One evening, a local officer, young, nervous, overworked, showed up just to observe, but by the end of the hour, he was practicing throws with the rest. Marcus never asked for names, never took attendance. The mat became its own kind of sanctuary, one where stories didn't need to be told to be heard. The hospital director, a man usually too busy for anything beyond numbers, stopped by once and stood by the door, arms folded, watching as people moved through the slow rhythm of drills. Later, he approached Marcus with a hesitant smile. "I never thought I'd see doctors and janitors bowing to the same person," he said. "You've done something rare here, Mr. Reed. You've built peace." Marcus only smiled. "No," he said softly. "They built it. I just showed them it was possible." Outside the gym, though, not everyone understood. A few senior staff grumbled about liability, about insurance and risk. One night, A memo circulated quietly through administration, questioning the necessity and safety of unlicensed physical training sessions. Marcus heard about it from Arturo, who'd come running to the booth with worry in his eyes. "They're saying might get shut down, Coach," Arturo said, voice thick with frustration. "After everything you've done." Marcus didn't look surprised. "Everything worth keeping eventually gets questioned," he said. "Don't worry about the noise. Noise passes." And it did. 2 days later, a letter appeared in the hospital suggestion box, written in uneven handwriting on lined paper. It was from an elderly patient named Mrs. Levinson, who'd been in physical therapy after a stroke. Her nurse, Clara, had been helping her recover using the breathing and movement techniques Marcus had taught. The letter ended simply, "For the first time since my husband died, I feel steady again. Tell the man in the security jacket that he gave me back my balance." The director read it aloud at a staff meeting. The memo vanished quietly after that. From then on, no one questioned Marcus again. The Saturday sessions continued through the winter, through the slow thaw of spring. The oak tree grew its first new leaves just as the city's chill began to fade. One evening in early April, Marcus finished his rounds and sat on the bench beneath that oak. Arturo joined him, his uniform jacket half-zipped, his hair damp from a passing rain. "Coach," he said, grinning, "they offered me a supervisor position." Marcus smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "You've earned it." "I wouldn't have without you," Arturo said. "Before I met you, I thought this job was just about watching cars. Now I feel like I'm actually protecting something." Marcus looked out at the rows of vehicles glinting under the streetlights. "That's because you are," he said. "You're protecting the quiet, the in-between moments. Most people don't see the value in that, but it's the quiet that keeps the world from falling apart." Arturo nodded slowly, his grin fading into thought. After a pause, he asked, "You ever think about retiring, Coach? You've done enough. You could teach full-time or just rest." Marcus chuckled softly. "Resting is easy when you've made peace with yourself. But I'm not done here yet." The younger man smiled and looked up at the tree. "Then I guess we'll keep showing up." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of distant traffic, the whisper of leaves. It wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was a kind that holds meaning, like two notes of song played in perfect harmony. The weeks rolled by. Marcus continued teaching, walking his rounds, moving through the hospital's rhythm as though he were part of its pulse. He still bowed before every shift, still paused under the oak to stretch before the night. Sometimes he'd catch his reflection in a car window and see the lines of age carved deeper into his face, but they didn't bother him anymore. They were reminders, not regrets. One morning in May, after finishing a session with the staff, Marcus stayed behind to help fold the mats. Clara lingered, too, her face flushed from effort. "You ever think of opening a real dojo?" she asked lightly. He laughed quietly. "A dojo doesn't need walls, Clara. It just needs people willing to listen." She smiled. "Still, it would have your name on it. Reed Judo Center. Has a nice ring to it." He shook his head, still smiling. "Names fade. Lessons last longer." When the gym emptied, Marcus stood for a while in the quiet space, the smell of sweat and resin hanging in the air. He could almost hear echoes of laughter, of feet on the mat, of the voice of his old coach from decades ago. He bowed once more, alone but not lonely. That evening, as the sun set low and golden across the parking lot, Marcus took his usual walk between the rows of cars. He stopped by the oak tree, the same one that had watched every chapter of his second life unfold. Its leaves rustled softly, brushing the air with a sound that reminded him of the ocean. He sat on the bench, watching the horizon shift colors, from amber to rose to indigo. The first stars began to blink awake above the city. For a long while, he just breathed. He thought of Tokyo, not the sound of the crowd or the crack of bone, but the moment right before, when two men bowed to each other in respect. He thought of Park Jin-ho's words, "Balance through forgiveness." And he realized that somewhere between the asphalt and the oak, he had finally found his own. His radio crackled softly, Arturo's voice coming through. "All quiet tonight, Coach." Marcus smiled. "That's the best sound there is." "See you on the next round," the young man replied. He leaned back, the air cool against his skin, the hum of the hospital behind him steady and alive. The world was no longer heavy on his shoulders. He'd carried enough, learned enough, forgiven enough. Now, all that remained was peace, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but settles quietly, like dawn breaking through fog. As the night deepened, the last lights of the hospital flickered out, one by one, until only the glow from the parking lot lamps remained. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the sound of the wind through the branches lull him. The rhythm was the same as a lifetime ago, the rhythm of the mat, of breath, of balance. When he opened his eyes again, a faint smile lingered on his face. He rose slowly, bowed once to the oak tree, and walked toward the hospital doors. The automatic glass slid open with a soft sigh, like the world taking one long, peaceful breath. And though the night went on, it felt somehow lighter, as if it, too, had learned something from the man who watched over it. Somewhere far away, in a small dojo in Seoul, an aging man with a cane paused his teaching and turned toward the open window, as if sensing an echo. He smiled, bowed once to the air, and whispered in Korean, "Peace to you, my friend." Back in Baltimore, the parking lot was quiet. The oak swayed gently in the spring breeze. A faint beam of moonlight fell across the empty bench where Marcus had sat, illuminating the scuffed concrete beneath it. Bare, simple, and steady. The kind of balance that endures.